When we say that living things have evolved, we mean that all living things are genetically related through a process of what Darwin called descent with modification from common ancestors. And here is what I call, when I teach it, the central mechanism of evolution. All right. Here's how evolution works. This is God's automatic creature-making machine. Evolution always occurs in 3 steps. First, we have mutation to DNA, which can occur in a multitude of very well understood ways. Secondly, we have altered embryological development. It alters the way the organism develops as an embryo, right here, represented by these arrows. And the third step is always what Charles Darwin discovered, natural selection, where an environmental scenario must exist which naturally selects for, or at least does not select against, the new phenotype. Here's just a few slides showing the guy who figured out the third step. That's the one that we got first, going back. Historically, natural selection was figured out first. Voyage of the Beagle in 1831, Darwin sailed around the world, and then upon his return got married, had many children, and proceeded in 1859 to publish one of the most famous works in the entire history of science on the origin of species. Okay, the second part of the central mechanism that was discovered was mutation to DNA, discovery of the double helix, principles of genetics in the first part of the century by people like Thomas Hunt Morgan and so forth. That was what was worked out next, and it's only extremely recently, it's really only since 1984, that we have even begun to understand the third middle step. This is the one that we've never been able to explain until now. And this is why creationists' objections to the theory are entirely reasonable. Up to this point in time, I would say. So would you like to see so here's a picture of an embryo developing. And the third step, altered development, now being unraveled by many, many scientists around the world. A couple things that you need to understand. One of my goals here is to help explain the theory itself. It's my contention that most creationists reject the theory because they don't really understand the theory. I would reject it too if I understood it the way creationists do. I really would, and I don't mean that as an insult. I used to be a creationist. I literally applaud you as creationists for not accepting the theory as you understand it. You've done a rational, reasonable thing. You've displayed your intelligence by doing that, as has Dr. Hovind, who's an extremely intelligent man, and he's probably going to steamroll over me in the rest of this debate. But would you like to see the machine itself in operation? Okay. Well, sorry, you can't. Because the evolution machine operates continuously and seamlessly all around the planet, in every nook and cranny of the Earth's multitudinous environments, and it is also constantly operating genetically on the molecular and biochemical level inside the living cells of all the world's organisms. The machine is way too complicated to see in the true sense of the word. But you know what? I have created a special graphic which provides a simplified, highly schematic picture of the machine in operation. And I call it an evolutionary phase space diagram. Now let me catch up here. What this is going to explain, what this explains is the evolution of legs. We're trying to explain how you go from a lobe-finned fish here to an early amphibian. Lobe-finned fish here, going down, see his little legs there. I really wish it was darker in here. Can we just turn the lights down a little bit? Okay, and we have a pretty good explanation, we think, of how this happened. We think that legs evolved underwater first, not on land. This is a creature called Acanthostega, long fish-like tail, totally fish-like body, but he had little tiny legs and toes, 8 toes. Here's the actual fossil of Acanthostega. Here's what the skeleton looks like articulated, and we're pretty sure he lived underwater because he had a long fish-like tail that would have done him almost no good on land, crawling around down low to the ground. So now here's my picture of the evolution machine, God's creature-making machine, and how it works. Okay, so here's what's going on in this machine. Now, I know this is really small for most of you, but we'll do the best. I'm doing the best I can. What we have, this is a multivariable graph. That is not a valley. Okay, it looks like a valley. It's not a valley. This is a three-dimensional graph in what I call phase space, evolutionary phase space, showing how the machine creates organisms automatically. Here on this axis we have the phenotypic axis. This is what the animals are like. Here we have the environmental axis, going in this case from water to land, deep ocean, coral reef, tide pool, shoreline, dry land. Here we're going from a ray fin fish to a coelacanth to various lobe fin fish, one of which here is Acanthostega, which I just showed you, Ichthyostega, a famous, more advanced amphibian, and then finally Tularpaton here, which is a full-fledged land-going amphibian. So we're going again, to give you the big picture, from fins to legs here, and we're going from the deep ocean to the dry land here. Now the vertical axis represents decreasing fitness. So if you're high, you die. If you're low, you go. In other words, you live. If you're high, you die. You're up on what I call the peaks of death. And if you're down low in what I call the valley of survival, that means you are fit. You are well adapted to your environment. Now watch how this works. Let's say you're here in phase space. Can you do the three-dimensional math? Okay, what are you? You're a ray-finned fish. Okay, you're a fish. Where are you? You're on dry land, so you are dead. You're a fish out of water, so you're dead. You are unfit for your environment. Let's do this one. What are you here? Follow it along. You're a full-fledged amphibian, but you're out in the deep blue sea. So you are dead. You are unfit. Let's do this one. What are you here? You're a ray-finned fish in the deep ocean. You're beautifully adapted to your environment. And right here you'd be Tularpaton on dry land but near a tide pool, so you're doing pretty well here. You're well adapted to your environment. One more here, Acanthostega, that would be right here. You're a primitive amphibian living in a tide pool, trying to make a living in a coral reef. Now, how could he have done that? Let's explain this. Right here, why do we think legs might have evolved underwater? Well, here's the theory. If he was out, so mom here takes a mutation in her sperm or egg cells, and that's a critical point to remember. Let's get all this stuff up here. Okay, the mutations to DNA have to take place in sperm or egg cells, otherwise they won't make it into the next generation. Remember always that the new phenotype, the new form of animal, always shows up in junior, always shows up in the offspring, and then natural selection comes into play and has to select, if this is what we're trying to evolve, has to select for this and deselect for the old type of organism. Now in the deep blue sea, do you want to have legs and toes? No. See, he would be poorly adapted. He's dead out there. You want to have fins if you're in the deep blue sea, and that's why we still have fish with us today after 400 million years. If you're living 5 miles deep in the ocean, in pitch black water that's freezing cold, at pressures that are twice what crush our nuclear submarines, what do you want to be? You don't want to be a human. You better hope to God that you're a fish down there. Okay, but here in a coral reef, see the island and so forth? Here in a coral reef, what we think could have happened is this. If you're in a coral reef, there's powerful currents going back and forth. There's algae and so forth. And one thing that you can try to do is to carry out what we would call ambush predation. You remain hidden in the algae or behind rocks and things like that, and then you leap out suddenly with your still fish-like tail and catch fish. Now you can see that if you're still a lobe-finned fish right here, he's going to have a little bit of a hard time carrying out ambush predation because there's powerful currents in a coral reef that are pushing him back and forth. And if he's trying to station keep in some algae, he would have to wave his fins and remain in one place, which is going to give away his location and scare the prey off. But look what he can do. He can do something that no animal has ever done before in evolution. He can hang on to things with his little legs and toes and remain perfectly motionless and then leap out and catch a fish. This is the theory for how Acanthostega may have been selected for and how legs evolved underwater. Okay, now here's an animation of that process. There's a constant chatter of mutation to DNA that's ceaselessly generating new forms of organisms. The environment is constantly changing here. This is constantly changing. Organisms are constantly migrating or getting blown into new environments. These are the random forces which drive evolution. But what happens next now, see, these are random forces. These are random mutations, totally random. Transposons are jumping around in the DNA, moving enhancers around and so forth and so on, creating chaos. Most of it's birth defects. Probably 99.9% of all the mutations are harmful. This is random events here in the environment, plate tectonics, climate, disease, drought, all kinds of things are taking place here. This is random, but what goes on now in the machine is anything but random. Evolution is not totally random. So let me now, and here, okay, I'm going to press on here and use even some of my time. Okay, now bear with me. I've got to bring up an animation. Okay, we'll try to put this on the whole screen. Okay, and here's what takes place in phase space. Each little dot represents a species or an individual, either one. Organisms explore evolutionary phase space now in single-step mutations, and they do it with ruthless efficiency like water exploring a canyon. So what's happening here is that we start off here with a fish in the deep blue sea, mutations take place, and then you go to the next phase here in the Valley of Survival. And now the numbers, since they're beautifully adapted, they build up. See, they build up in number there. So now you've got more of these guys, lobe-finned fish. They build up. And then there are so many of them. There might be 10 million, 100 million lobe-finned fish in the Pacific or something like that. And now you can do calculations and show that the probability of the next step, the probability of moving the right enhancer in front of the right homeotic homeobox gene or whatever, is not only possible, but it's inevitable. You can prove that it's inevitable that the next mutation will take place. And so now you get the next, you start to invade the next locus. The little yellow arrows represent mutations. So see, it just keeps building up, next mutation, building up, next mutation, building up, next mutation. And so the organism